Another outdoor game is in the books. Jumbo Joe retires as a tragic hockey death raises questions about protective equipment. Hey everyone, welcome into another edition of Off the Post. Rob Wong joined alongside by Toronto Sun Sports columnist Steve Simmons and post-media hockey columnist Bruce Garriock. And guys, let's start in Edmonton, where the Oilers defeated the Flames in the Heritage Classic, and without a doubt, these games are always well attended and draw attention locally. But Bruce, we'll start with you. Are the outdoor games getting a little bit stale, or is there still room for these types of spectacles?
Well, having taken part in the outdoor game here in Ottawa in 2017, I get why people in the city where it's held, Steve, get excited about them. They are a great spectacle. They're a lot of fun. It's a great party atmosphere. The alumni is usually involved. But I get where you and I, Rob, and maybe you, Steve, have kind of had enough of them. They're not the TV spectacle they once were. I think one on New Year's Day is a nice tradition, but that's probably enough. I think it's nice that they do it, and I think it's nice that they bring hockey to the great outdoors. But I do believe that you don't need 3 or 4 of them a year. I think one on New Year's Day would be just fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a question of whether you can make money or not, and that's why they're, big picture, that's why they're doing it. And obviously, you can sell 50,000 tickets at a higher price probably than you sell, 15 or 20,000 tickets on a regular basis. So it makes sense financially. I think the outdoor stuff lost its way years ago. But as Bruce points out, perfectly really, it really matters in the city where it's taking place. Like, the game yesterday really mattered in Edmonton. And here are statistically, two of the worst teams in the NHL playing. This could have been a national event if the Oilers are first in the NHL and the Flames are third. And then you want to tune in and see these two great teams playing in a different environment outdoors. And I even thought, I don't think television did it justice yesterday either, because they kind of filmed it like a regular game. And so it didn't even look most of the time like it was an outdoor game. So, after 5 minutes of sort of watching, two teams I don't care about at this point, I kind of drifted off to something else. And I think that's probably what happened around the league, especially in the United States, where you have two Canadian teams, and especially across Canada, where you have two teams that are fighting to win a game. And so, there's other factors involved. And this time you have the best player in the world, and, even that wasn't enough of a draw to keep me excited.
It's interesting, and I just wanted to add, one of the things I was thinking as I was watching that game, is you need to find a way, Rob, to bring the crowd closer. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about when I was watching that game at Edmonton was that, when I went to the outdoor game, which was an indoor game in the Heritage Classic that was held at BC Place Stadium, we were so far back you don't feel like you're in it. As Steve said, on TV, you can't see the crowd. For everything they've done, that's why I always thought that a game on Parliament Hill here would have been so fantastic, because you would have had the Parliament Hill in the background, and you're right. Once a puck is dropped, it just looked like another game, and the ice was fantastic and everything. But you're right. It's like the All-Star game. In the city it's in is great. Everywhere else, okay.
It's not great anywhere, Bruce. Anymore. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I always enjoyed All-Star Weekend until the puck was dropped, and then I go, okay,
yes,
I've had enough now.
Yeah. To me, it's before the skills competition starts on Friday night, and then
yeah.
Speaking of all-stars, one of the greatest players of the last 20 years called it quits over the weekend. Joe Thornton retiring after 24 seasons in the NHL. Of course, a lot of regular season success for Jumbo Joe, but he was never able to climb to the top of the NHL mountain. Steve, where does he rank among the greatest centermen of all time?
Well, I started to make a list last night when I saw the question, and I got to 20 before I even started considering Thornton. And I probably could have got to 25. And so a lot of it has to do with not having playoff success. But even when you go through regular season, and he was an amazing regular season scorer, especially a setup guy. Better than Gretzky? No. Better than Lemieux? No. Better than Beliveau? No. Better than Crosby, McDavid, Yzerman, Sakic, Forsberg, Mikita, Esposito. Like, you can go through a long list until you get down to sort of who are his equals. And so, yeah, a phenomenal career. He was the leading scorer for that entire time he was in the league in terms of points, top to bottom. But to me, he wasn't a guy who could get you over the top. And we've seen Yzerman do that, and we've seen Sakic do that, and we've seen Forsberg do that, and we've seen Messier do that, and Brian Trottier do that, and Peter Stastny and Doug Gilmour. So I can't put Joe in that top tier because he just doesn't fit there for me.
A first ballot Hall of Famer likely, guys, but the kind of guy who I guess him or his team always left you wanting a little bit more. And I think that's one thing I can say about him. I do have a funny story though. Joe Thornton, I get a text, and this is in 2005. I get a text from Darren Dreger, and he was Sportsnet at the time, saying, something's going on in San Jose. Scott Thornton, and it's two guys weren't on the ice for warm-up. So I'm in a bar in Boston because Ottawa is playing in Boston the next night. So I phoned the late John Ferguson Sr., Steve, who, as you know, was one of the great characters of our time in this game. And John Ferguson Sr., I said, hey, John, these two guys aren't on the ice. Do you know what's going on? He says, we got Thornton. We got Thornton. He's screaming at the top of his lungs that they got Thornton.
Do you know how many general managers were upset that they weren't given the opportunity? Because in the end, the Bruins didn't give up that much to get him.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to GMs the next day. That's a perfect Fergie story, by the way.
Oh my God, it was so good. It was just like it will always be my memory of Joe Thornton. And I sometimes you don't want to give away your sources, but that had to be one of the best.
No. When your sources have passed away, I guess you got a shot.
It was so classic Fergie, right? And I'm like, well, Mike O'Connell traded him. He says it's unbelievable. Because I got to be honest, you guys. I almost didn't know what Thornton meant. Like I thought it was kind of a joke, right? Like I'm thinking, well, he didn't get Joe Thornton.
Joe Thornton's career, he averaged at 58-point pace in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I think he's about 80-some point pace during the season, but he's 58-point pace. And you go through Gilmour, 85, Sakic, 90, Yzerman, 77, Sittler, 80, Beliveau, 89, Fedorov, 79, Mikita, 79. He's nowhere near those guys. So, yeah, wonderful regular season career, incomplete for me. Definite, as you say, Bruce, first ballot Hall of Famer. But don't tell me he's any better than the guys that I've listed off here today.
Yeah, for sure. Finally, guys, a tragic death overseas this past weekend. Former NHLer Adam Johnson dying after suffering a skate blade cut to his neck during a game in England. Bruce, this, of course, raises the question that many people have had for a long time, but do pro hockey leagues, the NHL included, need to make protective equipment for the neck and wrist mandatory at this point?
Well, I think that one of the things I think the players always want, Steve, and I think this is a difficult discussion to have in the wake of what happened. But I think what players always want, Steve, is choice. And, it's like that they used to have the choice to take off their visors when they came from junior. That has since been grandfathered. I could see a scenario, Steve, where, and I was thinking a lot about this when I saw the question, I could see a scenario where maybe it's grandfathered. And players coming into the league, into the National Hockey League and into the American Hockey League are required to have that protection that you're talking about, Rob. A lot of players look at it as a comfort thing rather than a safety thing. I don't know, I'm not a player, but I'm just thinking that this is certainly something that the National Hockey League and the American Hockey League will take a longer, closer look at. Don't you think, Steve?
There are two things a player should always have choice over: window or aisle. That's the only choice an NHL player should have. You start playing hockey at whatever age, and I coached 26 seasons of minor hockey, so I'm fully aware of what goes on when kids are starting. The first equipment you wear, you put a neck guard on. You wear neck guard all through your minor hockey times. You go to junior hockey, guess what's mandatory? A neck guard. So then you jump up and you take your neck guard off. Why? Wear the Kevlar, turtleneck. Wear the neck guard. It is not uncomfortable. It is not bothersome. It's just BS. And BS that in this case led to someone's death. I'm not as certain about the wrist thing, Rob, because the gloves, the only reason people get hurt is because they wear short gloves. If they wear the proper gloves, then they're not going to get cut in those places for the most part. But I think neck guards are mandatory from the day you start playing the game. There's no reason for them not to be mandatory in the NHL. And I like what the NFL does. The NFL basically tells players, this is how high you can wear your socks, let alone the equipment. They fine you if you do not wear your equipment properly. And I don't see why the NHL wouldn't do exactly the same thing. It took them a long time to get it right on helmets, and it shouldn't take them that long now to get it right with neck guards.
Definitely. As Bruce said, it's a long discussion that will be had, I'm sure, between all of these professional leagues. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. For Steve Simmons and Bruce Garriock, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week on another edition of Off the Post.